couple of seconds before we start saying hello to everybody. I'm going just to wait on LinkedIn real quick to see if we're going live. So if people who are online already are able to see us live, so give us a shout and like, or at least something for us to know that, okay, guys, now we can see you and you can stop being awkward on this one.
Yeah, we can. Please help us stop being awkward.
Yeah, exactly. We've got so many questions to go through today that it's very important that we are on the clock. We have had really many questions and interest from the audience to talk about a lot of topics. So just 1 second, checking it out on LinkedIn if we're going live. Doesn't seem like we are just yet.
No worries.
It says pre-live. There's that funny story of the first time when I went live was 15 minutes by myself, talking to myself, and I was alone in this one, so it was even weirder.
It's like I've done it with a podcast before, and you have no feedback.
Yeah.
Like whereas like we're having a conversation, you get like the feedback and all of that. It must be like what it's like to be like a radio announcer is what I thought. Like just talking for the sake of talking, getting it out there.
Exactly. But it doesn't seem like we're live, guys. Or anybody at Dream Data who could ping me on Slack to say that you're able to see us live, that would be good as well. So we can stop talking into the silence. Just a second. I will just check in with a colleague that was supposed to be there. Doesn't seem like we went live just yet.
I don't even know how to check, to be honest.
Usually there comes a notification that Laura is live, and it even pushes it to myself. But if you are in the event, then you start seeing yourself with a little delay as well.
I'll pop up my LinkedIn. Yeah, I usually get those when my contacts.
Yeah. So anybody who's there, let us know, because we can't see this just yet. This is really weird.
It says pre-live. No. There's 15 people in.
Precisely. I would like to understand why. Not yet. Alberto is saying not yet. So why? I wonder what we could do to... If I end the stream, then we're not going to go live at all. So what is happening?
How do we... I sent a message that said we're working on getting live to people. Details.
Yeah.
All right, let's see how we can pre-live. You work on your end. I'll do a little Google research here.
Yeah. This is really weird. A long time ago it happened before like this. And this time we should not be doing anything wrong on here. So I don't want to end the stream. I want to check on the channels that it says that it is sending data.
Yeah.
So it seems like it should be working, but and says it's streaming on the Dream Data's website, but we're not live on LinkedIn.
I can see you on YouTube.
You can see us on YouTube. Yeah, this is really weird. It's not sending it to LinkedIn. Let me just try to disable this one and then enable it. Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, I can see that YouTube is streaming.
I sent a message to the Restream support team too. They have a chat. They say it's slow though.
We're streaming both to YouTube and to LinkedIn. So what we're going to do right now, we're going to go into and send a link to everybody onto YouTube. So you can watch us on YouTube. Just a second. I'm going to go there. Okay. Yep, this one is live. It's just... So I'm sending this to the event attendees. Just a second.
Okay. Okay.
Like this.
Okay.
Oh, this is not cool. Okay, let's just give it a second so people can join on YouTube. Okay, can I do this? Okay, I can hear over here. That's not cool. Okay, so whoever has joined us on YouTube, could you also give us a shout that you can see us, because you can do comments on YouTube as well. I'm really sorry for this. Somehow LinkedIn did not connect this stream to the current event, but we're now on YouTube. Can everybody who's on YouTube just at least give us a quick comment? Yes, Patricia, you can see us on YouTube. Perfect. So 7 minutes after, now
We'll get going.
Exactly. We're finally
All right,
there.
Jeremy, Sacramento.
Perfect. Jeremy, Patricia, thank you. We're getting into this. So Carey, welcome
Hello.
to the show. I would like to introduce you first of all, or at least for you to introduce yourself in the perfect way that is relevant for our attendees. I think you are a person I met who is so knowledgeable about attribution and Marketo, but what I would not like to miss any details. So Carey, over to you.
Thanks, Laura. Great to see you again, Laura, and hello to everybody who's online. My name is Carey Picklesimer. I'm an independent MarTech consultant. I focus mostly on Marketo, HubSpot, and attribution software. I've worked with Visible. I also work in Salesforce. But what I really focus on is how the strategy is playing out for people. So what I want to do is I focus on how the tech gets to the outcome, or excuse me, how the strategy gets to the tech, to the outcome, not the tech first. So we're always kind of working on our processes and our thought, our mindset first. Mindset sounds a little wishy-washy, but what we really need to do is like, what are we trying to accomplish? And these are the tools we have at our disposal. So instead of saying, I have a drill, what can I, why do I need screws? You think like, I have a drill, I have a hammer, I have a saw. What tool do I need to get this particular part of the job done? So that's how I work. I tend to work with mid-market companies in the SaaS space, but I've worked with banks and financial individuals. A little nervous this morning, I guess. Financial institutions. So I've kind of worked among the gamut, but I like working with teams where, they're more small marketing teams. They're kind of being tasked both with doing the marketing and the measurement. So people wearing a lot of hats. So
yeah,
good morning.
And
Good
we
to see
that
everybody.
a lot.
Yeah.
Especially when they start moving kind of from marketing being a one-person band into something a little bit bigger as at a kind of more of a scale-up type of a company. Very cool. Carey, let's get into this. So to start with, what's attribution for you when you think about the concept of it?
Yeah, I was looking back and thinking like we used to use the term marketing analytics a lot more, and now we've switched to using marketing attribution. And so I think to a certain degree, like analytics and attribution and reporting tend to be terms that we use a little bit synonymously, and that's only partially true. The difference for attribution is it's essentially your analytics of your activity analytics blended with your revenue. So for an example would be like, we might look at form fills. That's a metric. That's analytics. That's reporting. We might say we had 100 form fills last month. What attribution does is goes and says, of the 100 form fills that we got, what revenue is coming from them? So it's a way of assessing the quality of the people you're interacting with. So it's that revenue portion that really sets it apart.
It's so interesting that like when you talk about attribution, you might think measurement and quantity, but you're talking quality added.
Quality, yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah. So a lot of times, like I always say, like at the heart of attribution, we're trying to answer the question, what is the best next step? Say you're given a budget of $100,000 to spend in 2023 on your marketing efforts. How do you want to spend that money? So you're going to say, what's the best place to spend the money? Well, the hardest part to begin that question is, how do you define best? Is it the most names from the top of the funnel? That's easy to measure early. But at the end of the day, that doesn't mean anything. You could bring in 1,000 new people, and if only 2 of them go on to be customers, you're not necessarily helping your company. So what you want to do is focus on like, how do we get the best people into our sales process that are the most likely to buy from us going on? So it's kind of like you'd be better off to bring in 5 people if 4 of them go on to become customers, rather than bring in 1,000 people if only 2 of them go on to become customers. So it's that trying to figure out what's the best thing to do to get the right people into our sales process.
Absolutely. And it paints back the picture of what we started at Dream Data, defining your ICP, defining what is the right client for you. So maybe 5 is better than 100 because you'll close them faster, bigger revenue, and they're possibly not going to burn either. So cool. But Carey, I listened to your podcast on marketing operations before, and one of the things that really hit me was kind of, why are we talking about this at all? Like historically, attribution, why is this a problem? And at the same time, is it killing marketing? Tell me.
It's interesting because I've been around marketing for a long time, and my background is actually design and advertising. So I was very much not on the data side. I was in the creative side, the logo side, all of that, more on the branding side. And there really isn't a good measurement of that. All of the measurements that you find about that are very qualitative. But being top of mind was always the goal. Like, how do we create the experience for a person that when they see our logo or they see this ad, they know it's our company, they have a good feeling about us, and they come back. And it really was with the advent of bringing in the internet and doing a lot more measurement early on that then the conversation started to shift. Because I remember, 10, 15 years ago when we were having conversations as marketers, they're like, well, now we have this data. And I think the term you heard a lot was, we can earn a seat at the table. Now we can earn a seat at the table with this data. We can be sitting with the CFO. We can be sitting with the chief of operations. We're now in the mix because we finally have data. So let's get at the table and what do we talk about? And that's good because I think it gave a level of scientific analysis, which made sense to the finance people and the operations people. It gave that ability to kind of measure something that had previously just probably been viewed. Maybe it wasn't as respected as it should be, or it wasn't as understood. But the problem is, as soon as we got that seat at the table, there was kind of this need to stay at the table and we wanted to talk the language of the CEO and CFO, but what we forgot was we still have to speak our language. And so we can't put all of the focus on what's measurable. Like, there are so many things that go along with marketing. And I would even expand marketing to, if you really think about it, like your customer support team. You mentioned churn. Like, the worst case scenario is you spend all this money to get new customers in the door. And if they're gone in a year, not only have you lost a customer, you've lost a prospective customer, because once they've been your customer and you've lost them, that's worse than them never having been your customer at all. They're like a negative. They might be a detractor from your company if they come in, if they weren't the right fit. And so attribution, if we put that as a primary focus above understanding our ICP and going beyond that, like, not just what is our ICP, what matters to them? These are people. What worries do they have at work? I remember something I learned early on in a content marketing class was that we have this tendency to think of B2B purchasing as very analytical, and people are making decisions based more on like facts and figures. And we don't think of it as being emotional. There's actually a lot more emotion in a B2B buying process, maybe than in personal, because there's a level of fear. Your jobs may be at stake. If you're going to go to your company and recommend that we bring in this software platform that's going to cost, 6 figures a year to maintain, we're going to need staff to maintain it, and you have to say, this is what it's going to bring us. Like, that's way different than making a decision to buy your own self a car or a TV, where if you mess it up, it's really just on you. It's not affecting other people. So it's interesting,
It goes so much deeper than just can we attribute marketing's work to revenue?
Right.
Possibly can, but we have to look at it so much broader. But now you spoke about bringing in marketing to the table. I love that. But to stay at the table at the same time, talk with me about the ownership of attribution. Who owns attribution usually at the company? Where does it start, and who do you think should be owning it?
I mean, I do think, like, when I say that it's bad that we felt like we had to stay at the table, I think that it's really important to do this. Like, it doesn't mean that it's not important. It just has to be a blend. And so I do think it starts with marketing. It kind of starts with marketing and ends with marketing, in that marketing is the one making the decisions on where to spend the time and the money in the marketing efforts, right? Like, so I tend to use a very simple idea of sales and marketing, and that both groups are contributing or communicating with prospective buyers. The difference is marketing is one to many and sales is one to one. And it's, like, obviously a little like sales is talking to multiple people at a company. You have multiple, but if you really look at it that way, that's the key difference between the two departments, to how they operate mechanically. And so when you go with that and you think about that, marketing is the one doing this mass communication. So when you start an initiative, you need to have a sense early on, how am I going to measure this? And if it's a brand campaign, the answer may not be something you put on an Excel spreadsheet. It might just be like, we're going to poll our customers after 6 months. It's that. But every initiative you do should go in thinking, this is what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to measure success along the way. So that's where marketing should measure it. That being said, marketing should absolutely early be in communications with sales. Sales and marketing should be speaking. We're not just, like, there's graphics of, like, comics of, like, marketing throwing leads over the fence. We're going to throw. It should not be that way. There should be no surprise. Sales knows the ICP, marketing knows the ICP, and we should be talking weekly, monthly, quarterly. How are those people coming in? Are they the right ones? What are you hearing from them? What are the pushbacks you're getting? Like, when they say, I heard about you from the podcast, well, which podcast, which episode? Like, ask questions. And so marketing needs to be kind of the one steering those conversations, because I don't think salespeople always know the right information to pass back. And I would even say early on, you need to be bringing in, the management level, the operations people, the finance people, all of that. And so that you can kind of be managing expectations. Like, the worst thing you can do is hope to have this grand reveal at, like, a quarterly business review where you say, like, this is what we did. And they're like, wow, that's not what I thought I was going to see. You should be, like, communicating with them constantly about this stuff, as much as they will tolerate.
Yeah, and it goes into what you're talking about, more the culture of the company, how we're working together, rather than just reporting of attribution. Interesting.
Exactly.
All right. But now, if we put on numbers on marketing, and, like, they come with attribution, they're also asked to be measured. Now they're coming into the board meetings and so on. Are we then killing their ability to be creative?
Yeah. I mean, I love that when we started this conversation before anybody was online, we were talking about, like, ICPs and all of that. And we kind of know that as a term, but what I think attribution really does is, like, we talk about how this is measuring the quality, the people that go on to be, we measure the opportunity value, the lifetime value, annualized value, all of that. But what you really want to be using attribution for early is you want to be learning about which people are coming in. Where are they hearing about you? Are they doing a lot of stuff on social media? Are they doing stuff, like, is it a group that is, like, mainly podcasts or magazines? Like, we don't really know. All of these things, like, this stuff still happens. Is it much more of a word of mouth? And so what you want to do is use this data to understand how people are acting in real life. And then you take that and you start to craft the message, right? Like, you kind of understand stuff. I mean, we've all been recipients of this, like, you're buying something and then Amazon's like, I noticed you bought this flashlight. Do you need batteries? And it's like, well, statistically, because, like, maybe someone in that side said, hey, people need batteries. Or maybe they went and said, statistically, people buy batteries at the same time they buy this. And so they suggest that to you. And so when that happens, and it feels like they're trying to solve your problems rather than, like, spy on you, It's a much more positive experience. And so you can do that with your audience. If you track which web pages are they visiting, what is that topic of that? And then I always say, like, expand on that. Can you take something that maybe was a white paper? Could you turn that into a podcast, into a video, into an infographic? Spread it out and present the information in different ways so that you can reach your audience in the way that they need to get that information.
This is so invaluable. Also for sales, because you want to be talking as your buyers want to buy from you. So you're designing the buyer experience as they're actually buying, not like how you envision they are doing it.
Right.
But
exactly.
People, then you would kind of, as a salesperson, then marketing is your closest ally. And they would tell, oh, these persons maybe are now in our SQL stage. Usually they read this. Go and send this over to them so you don't ask like cliche stuff or something.
Yeah. And I always say, like, don't be weird about it, right? Like, don't send an email that says, I noticed you were on this web page and you didn't complete the form. So here's the white paper. But I do think it becomes the type of thing to start a conversation with when you look at it for how, like, I think like what you really need to do, that something we've lost track of is empathy for our buyer. And put some empathy on it. Like, imagine they're as busy as you. They have pressures at their job. So how can you make their job easier? Don't make them work for it. Reach out and say, like, I know you don't even say I noticed. Like, you might just say, like, this is a white paper that's really popular to some of our other customers. So what I did was I highlighted the 3 biggest points in this email that might help you, in the next few months as you go about doing your job.
Nice.
So
nice.
Like little things. Like, we should be picking out, like, to me, the real nuggets are in the details that we have a tendency to just brush right over.
For sure. And the conversation is so interesting because it is shifting much more into both the quality and qualitative measurements. But when you think about attribution, usually whenever whoever hears of attribution, they would say, okay, so this is for leadership, this is like all the channels that we are in, and let's scale them. For operations is something else. Can you help me understand, where do we see gaps in attribution expectations? Company
I think
are having different ones.
I mean, I think the biggest gap that we have, and it's common across all companies, all industries, is that there's a big difference between what executives think they're going to get out of attribution and what marketers are doing with it. Because, like, everything we've just been talking about is how marketers can use the data. But the reality is we are all asked to provide reports on our spend, its success rate, why should we continue spending in that way? And so that's where you get into attribution at scale. And that's where a tool like Dream Data or Visible, or if you're exporting data from Google Analytics and Marketo and all of that and putting it in like a Tableau or a Power BI, whatever tool you're using, what you're really trying to do is make sense of lots of data boiled down into something that can kind of be easily understood. Where we find gaps is that it is definitely different than financial data. So, for example, we can run a report of all the opportunities that were created and closed in 2022, and that should be a pie that we can split apart, and we can break it apart by sales rep, we can break it apart by industry, whatever, but it's a pie and we can slice it into even pieces. Attribution data is not that clean, on the simple fact that what it's doing is it's measuring human activity. And human activity is not predictable or logical. And I'll use one example that I use frequently. You have somebody's personal, or you have someone's business email in your database. You're sending out invitations to a webinar. It's a high value webinar. People who do this are going to close at an enormous rate. It's an awesome webinar. But the person who fills out the form uses their personal Gmail because they're going to watch it when they're home for a sick day. And so now you have a person that doesn't tie back to their business email until you go through the steps to rectify it. And that's one example in a small way. But what happens is when you have a large database, those nuances start to kind of skew the data, which what happens then is really unfortunate, in that instead of looking at it and saying, okay, we know we're measuring humans, that there is some fluctuation of error in this data, we're going to be okay with a 90% accuracy rate. This is what we talk about being directionally accurate. Like we had more than last year. It doesn't really matter if it's 90, 100, or 110. We're kind of in the ballpark. But what happens is once an executive starts looking at it and starts asking questions, and it kind of like you start pulling back this thread, it starts to feel like it's not accurate. And because it's not accurate, well, then none of it's accurate. And that's like a real detrimental way to look at it, because it's always been inaccurate. I mean, branding is inaccurate, but it's still valuable. Doesn't need to be accurate, So that's the hardest part. And I see that everywhere. And I'll be honest, even getting to work with as many clients as I've been fortunate enough to work with and speak with them and their higher ups, it's still a really hard argument to win, because it still comes back to like, but what do you mean it's not accurate? When you say it's not accurate, like how am I supposed to not trust that? Because there's also the feeling like, are people hiding things? Are we skewing the data to favor different things? So it's a really hard perspective to have.
Yeah, it can both bring you closer or take you apart, depending on which path of the conversation you're picking up. That's right. And if management is measuring marketing only according to the dashboards that they're getting, what are the dangers there?
Yeah. I mean, I think that what ends up happening, and this is the one that I feel strongest about because it has a real high human cost, like it takes its toll on marketers, it leads to burnout, it leads to frustration, is that then you stop marketing for what will be best long-term, and you start marketing based on what you can measure and what will look good on the dashboards. You start skewing what you do. Like you might be gating content that really shouldn't be gated just to be gaining more people in your database. And some content should be gated, some content should not be. But if your goal is measurement, you're going to gate it. And that's not great.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And one other thing that I think is really important that I probably should have mentioned in the last one about the human thing is we can't forget all of the privacy laws. This is really important, that we need to respect our audience and respect all the laws. I mean, you look at GDPR, what we can measure, the big law, CCPA in California. I mean, when you have California making a law, it basically affects the whole US just because of the size and their reach. This is a really important thing that marketers have to both understand and respect, that not all of our audience wants to be tracked all the time. I don't think any of us as marketers, how many marketers have ad blocking software active on their computer? We're all dodging being tracked too. So that part plays a big role in the accuracy of our data. But again, it doesn't mean that it's not valuable.
Right. So if you have a company working with who are considering to add attribution software or build in-house attribution into the mix, what is it that they should start thinking about to begin with?
I mean, I think that everybody should be doing this in some way, shape, or form. I mean, even myself as a sole proprietor with a small HubSpot database, I still take a look, like where are people hearing about me from? So I don't think you should feel intimidated by the need to have software when you begin. In fact, a lot of the things that make you successful with attribution software comes down to fundamentals. And I'm sure you've seen this with your Dream Data customers. It's the people who have a clear sense of what they want to measure. They have a clear vocabulary internally. They have clear communications across the different departments: sales, marketing, finance, customer support. So I think that the first thing you want to do is define the channels that you're going to measure and just get your vocabulary the same. Are you going to call it paid social, or are you going to call it, social-paid, social-organic? It's semantics, but semantics cause problems down the line for sure. So getting that shared vocabulary of what you're measuring, and then little stuff that's free. Everybody should be sending out with UTM values. There's tons of, Google itself will help you build a UTM. And so if you don't understand how to use UTMs, ask another marketer. It took me a long time to figure it out too. It's a little bit, how do you get them back in on your forms? You don't have to have JavaScript. Almost all of the major, even like Squarespace, you can gather hidden fields. You don't have to know a ton. So start doing that kind of stuff. And then I think what you want to do is just kind of build this relationship with your data. But I always like to say, like, go into it more as a detective than as a person looking to kind of build a PowerPoint. What can you learn about your audience, about the buying process, about all of that? And then you have this data to kind of start the story. I mean, one of the things when you sent me some of the questions in advance, I loved that storytelling. I think the words were used more than once, because the data, when you craft a story about the data, it's not fiction, but you're building it in a way that, like, everybody likes to hear a story rather than look at a spreadsheet. So that is what I would say. Like, start to build this like relationship with your data where you start to see it as clues to your audience that you use on a weekly or monthly basis. So
Right. And it was one of the questions before we joined about, like, how can you use attribution or any other data touches that you already got to tell your go-to-market story. So it is a story rather than just like, I know this is a complete map. This is how we should be growing, because it will be ever changing all the time.
Right. I was talking with someone yesterday saying, do you think any of the measurements you're using now in January 2023 really relate to what was going on in January 2022? Like, the world is changing quite a bit. There's a lot of stuff going on constantly. So we have to constantly be adjusting. So you can't just set it and forget it. It's not like that.
Right. So, one question, Carey, that we get from a lot of our prospects is, can you help me prove marketing contribution to revenue?
Right.
What is your opinion about that kind of a request?
It's probably one of my two least favorite phrases: proving contribution to revenue and helping understand how do we give credit. Those are my two least favorite, because it implies that there's like one group that is doing this one thing or this series of things at a certain time that is going to work for everybody, and it doesn't. So I would ask like one hypothetical question. Do you ask your customer service team to prove their contribution to revenue? Like, do you ask them to prove that? Do you ask your HR, prove that you're doing your job? You should be doing your job. I mean, I feel like doing your job is like step one of doing your job. Like, show up and do what you're assigned to do. But that being said, I realize that that's like a very esoteric way of looking at it. It's big picture. We can't quite throw that back in our bosses' faces when they say that. So what I think is important is that you are able to understand what's going on. Like, you need to have a good understanding of what's going on. It shouldn't be happenstance. You shouldn't be throwing darts at the dartboard and just praying for success. What you need to do is go in and saying, this is what we spent last quarter. This is what we saw happening. Unfortunately, we noticed a big decline in social. So in the next quarter, what we're going to do is move some of the money and effort we were spending on that into paid search, or we're going to invest in a podcast. What you really need to do is you need to have the strength of character based on the data that you have to say, here is how this is impacting. And one of the other hardest parts about attribution to explain to people is, for most B2B SaaS companies, the buying cycle is anywhere between 6 months, 18 months, right? Like, we have some companies that have really long buying cycles. Well, that means that what you're doing today is going to impact revenue in mid-2024. It's not going to show up on any of the reports that you do this year. But also, all of the revenue you have this year is kind of the result of what you did last year. So there's a timing gap. And that's why we have to say, it's more like you use the dashboard of your car to kind of keep, you have a goal in mind. So what you need to do is you say, like, this is our goal. We know that our company needs to bring in X revenue. We know that this year our intent is to focus on building our back to base sales rather than net new logos. So, like, you really want to be clear about what the destination is. And then you start using all those dashboards to kind of make sure you're on the same path, the right path. And so it's like kind of like just gently steering in between the guardrails of that line. And so I think that you've got to resist the urge to build reports that always look positive, because that's not true. Not everything's always positive. But when things do start to dip, you should have an assessment of why, and you need to be prepared for some options to correct it. You can't just say, well, the economy is really bad, so people aren't buying. It's like, okay, well, if that's true, what's our plan? How do we communicate something better? How do we change our offerings? All of that. You really have to be informed. And I think the other thing that I would recommend people doing is don't wait to be asked. Get the data first and go to your executives and saying, these are our marketing initiatives. These are how we're measuring it. These are our goals. Here's how we intend to get there. I'd like to have this meeting with you once a month, once a quarter, whatever it is, with your timeline, so that we can share with you how we're doing. It's a much better way to control the conversation than it is to wait for someone to come and ask you. And then you're kind of behind the power curve of like, now they're asking me for like how many people clicked emails. And you're like, that's not what I wanted to talk about at all. You want to be the one bringing the stuff because you know what's valuable. They may not fully understand which data points are actually useful in making better marketing and sales decisions.
Yeah. I love that really much, especially because I'm in sales. Because what is being sent to me from marketing means that has been cooking for at least half a year. So if marketing is able to capture it early and say that to the executives or to the sales team, this is what's happening. What should we do? Should we add a channel? Should we cut spend? What is it that we should do? So in the final line, when we close the client, we know why we did this.
Right. Yeah. And if just you being in sales, like what a more positive experience than for a marketer to come to you and be like, hey, just a heads up, I'm noticing our web traffic has dropped off dramatically. Here's why I think that's happening. And here, like, can you and I talk? Can we brainstorm some ideas based on what you know and what I know on how to get ahead of this? Because I don't want to see our opportunity creation drop 3 months from now. Like, then you need to act like the partner you want to be. You can't expect, and I don't mean this in a rude way, but like respect is earned, not given. And so if you want to be seen as a valuable partner to the organization with a seat at the table, you need to act as a valuable partner with a seat at the table. So you have a lot of access to data. You have a lot of access to behavioral data, demographic data, all of that stuff. You might be the first one to spot a red flag, or you might be the first one to spot an opportunity. Go to the people and start. I think it's great if you can build a level of trust in the organization that you can have these conversations maybe before all the thoughts are fully baked out. Like I'm a very extroverted thinker. So I tend to be like, I'm seeing something. I don't know what to make of it. Can we talk through it? That doesn't work with everybody. I'm not going to go to a CEO and say like, hey, can we spend an hour brainstorming this? Their time is, spent on other things. But if you have the right relationships in the organization, that you can start identifying problems and opportunities and then together build a plan. That's like the best case scenario.
Love that. Absolutely. It's a very good use case. So Carey, for now, I will ask for some questions from the audience. If you've got any follow-up questions you would like us to talk about, we will do that. And I've got one more of a like futuristic thinking question about AI and stuff. We all love to talk about that nowadays. But before we go there, Carey, did I miss out on some very specific things that you think that, oh, we should have been talking more about this? Or
No, I mean, like, I think that one of the question was like, what's the balance between creativity and data? And someone posed this on LinkedIn the other day. And I think it's just that yin yang graphic of it's kind of a 50-50, but rotating, like it's never like data first, creativity second. It's like data, creativity, data, creativity. Like it's got to be this like ebb and flow. We're always working together. What data do we have? What do we learn? What can we do that gathers us more data? What do we have? What do we learn? What do we do? Type thing. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And because we're used to marketing to be so creative and I spoke everything branding and so on. But if we do all that stuff and measure, then you can continuously be very creative in the realms that actually are bringing revenue to the company, not just what is cool.
Exactly.
I love that. So anybody has any questions in the audience so far? put them there. We're going to pick it up after we speak about AI. So Wilfred has asked a question about how can you, well, maybe it's like, I mean, AI has been so overused. It's like, what is this at all? It's just automated data, right?
Right.
But his question is very specific. How can you use attribution to predict campaign performance? Can you use that? Have you seen any use cases? Talk about that a little bit.
I'll be honest that I haven't had a ton of experience using AI in this realm or in any realm, maybe. But that being said, I will go back to something that my economics professor said in college. And he said they've done constant, like, you know, this was, I don't want to say what year it was. It was 2000. No, it's like, no, it was even before that. But basically, like in looking at stock market performance, if you have monkeys throwing darts at a dartboard compared to the best level of analyst, compared to the best computer analyst, who is the best at picking stock performance? And the answer is none of them. They're all equal, because what affects stock performance, which is the same thing that affects campaign performance, is what's going on in the market right now. And I don't know how much AI can take in external factors. So AI being like a very general thing. Like if you assume that Chat GPT, I guess, that we could put in this question and say like, which campaign, like how much do they really know? And so I think it's like a good starting point. Like that's what someone said, like you could use it for your first draft. So like if we say like, this AI says this campaign will perform really well if we run it now, run it, you know, do it as a pilot, watch it. Maybe you don't invest all of your money, you start to do it. But I think that where I get a little bit eerie about AI is this idea of like, if you think about it, truly you should be building a relationship with your prospects and your customers that should be based on a level of authenticity. And some of that is measurable, right? Like all companies seeking attribution software or sales software or operation software, there are commonalities that can be measured and put on a spreadsheet. But that doesn't necessarily mean that AI is going to be able to crunch all of that data and give you everything you need. So keep the human part of it. Again, work hand in hand. I think AI is kind of like that data side. And then the creativity is like, you want to bring the human side. I'm old fashioned in the sense that I still like human creativity and writing. And I think that luck, happenstance are all certain things. Like it happened to be lucky that you went out and got coffee one day and bumped into the person who you just happen to be selling to because you're local, whatever it might be. Like, let's not negate how luck or personal, like being nice to a person, you know, like all of these things matter and they're not all measurable. So I think that this is where you've got to strike that balance between what is important for human to human interaction and what is important for the data side.
Love that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So balance it out. Your creativity,
Balance it out.
your human and the data. Love that. Right. We didn't have any questions on the chat. Okay. So there is a question on the chat.
There we go.
Ellen. So I'm sure there's no right or wrong answer. There's coming in up here. But what amount of investment have you seen companies making in attribution software relative to overall budget?
That is actually a great question because it often gets asked in terms of like, when should we consider adding on attribution software? So I have a very general rule of thumb that you probably want to wait to get attribution software until the amount of money that you're spending on advertising in some way, whatever channels it is 3 to 4 times what the attribution software costs. So if you're buying a service that's $20,000 a year, I would probably expect that your company is spending $80,000 to $100,000 on marketing efforts to truly get some sort of ROI, because what you want is to be able to use the attribution software to make better decisions on that spend. And so that being said, it can also be, so that's like a very broad rule of thumb for people who have a budget. If you have a budget of $20,000 and you don't do any outbound spend and it's all organic, let's not forget that time is still valuable. And so when you're doing your organic advertising, social, content marketing, SEO, all of those things, attribution software can still provide a lot of data that isn't as easy to get just using tools like Google Analytics and your Marketo stuff. You can still do some of it, but that's probably where you're going to start to see the best bang for your buck. I would kind of kick that back to you, Laura. What do you say on that when people ask you?
Yeah, I love the question, because as a rule of thumb, as exactly as you're saying, look at your paid spend. What are you spending on, especially on paid? Because this is where usually the biggest savings are seen instantly. It's like, what's the ROI? If you're spending a lot on your paid marketing channels, it will be pretty easy. It's like if your attribution software will cost you like 5% of your overall yearly spend, definitely invest in that. But we've got clients who came to us that are growing absolutely organically, use almost zero for paid, but they wanted to understand, is organic working? Our SEO campaigns that we're running, are those working? Help us out to map it. Are we closing any business out of those? Because we're bootstrapped, we don't do that, or we don't believe in paid or whatever. If they're in like kind of a very niche market, you might not need paid. So mapping the data together is important. At the same time, you can calculate the time that your operations team is using connecting the data together. You kind of trust it, but if they're using a couple of hours every week just to get the reports out to management, it also might be a good case.
Yeah.
On top.
One of my favorite, sorry to interrupt. I have a tendency to do this. I get very excited. One of my favorite things about attribution software is actually, instead of tracking which channels matter, because there's a tendency that you're going to do the channels you're going to do. Meaning, just because, Twitter doesn't bring in a ton, if it's a low lift to do Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram and all that, like, you're still probably going to do it because of the brand exposure. So there's a level of, not everything is going to be a difference. Like, you're not going to change your pathway. But I really love using attribution software to look at which content and topics are resonating with people. Is there a particular piece of content that your high value clients all relate to? That can be a white paper, a blog post, whatever it is. Like, I love that because to me, it tells me more about the mind of my customer and prospect than just where they came from. So I think there is a value to it, but I understand that when you're looking at, a spend, you've got to be very cautious about how you spend that money. So thank you very much for that question.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. All right, Carey, thank you so much for today.
This was fantastic.
Before we finish this off, what is the best way for people to engage with you if they have questions or would like to work with you?
Yes, I am on LinkedIn all the time. It's my favorite. That's my favorite channel to reach out. I don't do Twitter as much, and Instagram just takes a lot of work to get the images out, but I'm on LinkedIn all the time. I love having conversations. So if you manage to make it to this LinkedIn Live, you've seen my name. You don't have to spell it. Just connect with me, and I'd love to chat with you. And Laura, I love chatting with you. I love your energy. I love your lives. So keep it up.
Thank you so much. Everybody who has been here on our live, feel free to join our Dream Data's LinkedIn Slack community or listen to any of the other podcasts that we are doing or are going to do in the future. And the Attributed podcast we just started running. Thank you so much, Carey. Speak to you later.
Take care.